All right, welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to unpack the multi-year buildup and the sudden dramatic explosion of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. Look, this isn't just your standard history lesson. It's a really fascinating blueprint of how systemic pressures, massive ideological whiplash, and sheer human frustration can collide all at once to completely shatter an empire's status quo.
We're going to trace this whole thing chronologically. So, first, the crisis of Stalinism. Then Imre Nagy's new course, the spark of rebellion, the armed uprising itself, and finally, the dramatic turn toward reform.
So, Section 1, the crisis of Stalinism, building the pressure. To really understand the explosion, we first have to look at the powder keg that was being packed in the early 1950s.
Imagine if a fifth of your paycheck just vanished. Well, that's exactly what happened under Matyas Rákosy's deeply oppressive Stalinist regime. Extreme control and forced heavy industrialization caused a massive 20% drop in real income for Hungarian wage earners by 1953. The government was aggressively pushing compulsory agricultural quotas, completely neglecting consumer goods, and using the dreaded secret police, the AVH, to purge and terrorize society. This kind of extreme rigidity created an absolutely intolerable daily burden for everyday citizens.
Moving right along to Section 2, Imre Nagy's new course, a shift in policy. After Stalin dies in 1953, the political landscape shifts dramatically. The Soviets actually forced a change in Hungarian leadership, bringing in Imre Nagy as prime minister with one direct mandate: fix the impending economic collapse.
Talk about ideological whiplash for the public. On one hand, you have Rákosy's rigid authoritarianism, mass terror, state-forced land seizures, all of that. On the other hand, Nagy steps in with a totally different playbook. He's suddenly prioritizing consumer goods so people can actually buy things, granting broad amnesty for political prisoners, and offering real agricultural relief. Honestly, it was a breath of fresh air after years of absolute terror.
Nagy took on this monumental task by pushing through 5 major reforms. He drastically rolled back state terror by ending forced collectivization and cutting prices to instantly boost living standards. But he also tackled the atmosphere of fear head-on, granting amnesties and establishing what he called a popular front, which basically cracked the door open for a bit more independent political activity. He was trying to empower workers and peasants without entirely abandoning the socialist framework.
But as you might guess, that release valve was abruptly jammed shut. The Soviets started panicking that Nagy was losing his grip. By 1955, Rákosy's hardliners managed to leverage Soviet anxiety to strip Nagy of his premiership. But here's the crucial takeaway. You just can't put the genie back in the bottle. Nagy was pushed out, sure, but he left behind a politically awakened society that was absolutely furious about losing their newly granted freedoms.
Which brings us to Section 3, the spark of rebellion. The stage is set. By the fall of 1956, the environment was practically begging for a showdown between a deeply frustrated public and a totally divided leadership.
This speech is incredible because it perfectly captures the nation's boiling point. It happened on October 6th at the ceremonial reburial of Laszlo Raj, a leader who had been executed in a show trial years earlier. When the regime finally allowed the ceremony, nearly 200,000 people showed up. And as Béla Szás famously declared, they weren't just burying victims, they had an unswerving resolve to literally bury an era of Stalinist terror. The walls of fear were officially coming down.
Now, the government's response to all this unrest was just a mess, primarily because they were fractured into 3 camps. You had hardliners like Erno Gero, who wanted to use brute force, you had reformers like Nagy hoping for political compromise, and then you had the revolutionaries, these independent student groups and workers boldly demanding multi-party democracy. University students even drafted a 16 points manifesto that ignored every single political taboo of the time. The tension was off the charts.
All right, Section 4, the armed uprising. Escalation in October. This is where we look at the violent, chaotic escalation that unfolded over just a handful of hours. You really have to ask yourself, how did tens of thousands of citizens marching peacefully on October 23rd suddenly end up at war? I mean, they gathered just to show solidarity with political changes in Poland, but within hours, the entire fabric of the nation changed.
The timeline here is frantic. At 3 p.m., people are marching peacefully at Bem Square. They're carrying Hungarian flags, but they've literally cut the communist coat of arms right out of the center, leaving this massive empty hole. The crowd grows, demanding Nagy come back to power, but the authorities don't budge.
At 8 p.m., hardliner Erno Gero broadcasts a super harsh speech denouncing the protesters. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. By 9 p.m., outside the heavily guarded radio station, the first shots ring out. And just like that, a peaceful protest mutates into an armed siege.
That same evening, in this incredible act of defiance, the crowds physically tore down the ultimate symbol of Soviet oppression. They toppled the massive, widely hated Stalin monument in City Park, dragged this bronze colossus through the streets, and smashed it to pieces. It was a crystal-clear visual message. The old rules were gone.
But the regime definitely struck back, and the cost was staggering. 100 lives were lost during a chaotic massacre at Parliament Square on October 25th. Crowds had actually been fraternizing with Soviet tank crews, thinking they had reached a peaceful understanding, when sudden gunfire erupted, likely from security forces hiding on the rooftops. The sheer panic and bloodshed of that massacre irrevocably turned hopeful protesters into hardened freedom fighters.
This ushers in Section 5, the turn toward reform, a political reckoning. Facing down vastly superior Soviet tanks, the outgunned rebels used their knowledge of city streets and improvised weapons like Molotov cocktails to fight the Red Army to a standstill.
With the central state practically collapsing, society just rapidly organized itself from the ground up through workers' councils. These were spontaneous grassroots committees formed in factories and towns to fill the power vacuum. And these local councils didn't want minor economic tweaks. They immediately demanded the total removal of Soviet troops and the complete disbanding of the secret police.
Realizing that partial reforms were failing completely, Imre Nagy, who was back in the premiership, made a massive political pivot. Over October 27th and 28th, he threatened to resign just to force hardliners to accept a ceasefire. Even more importantly, he officially recognized the uprising not as a counter-revolution, but as a legitimate national democratic movement, and he promised to dissolve the security police. He essentially aligned the government entirely with the revolution's goals.
And then came the ultimate breakthrough. On October 30th, Nagy announced the end of the one-party system over the radio. He formed a coalition cabinet that brought previously banned political parties back from the dead. The communist monopoly was officially shattered, and it looked like the revolutionaries had secured a miraculous victory.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up our explainer today. With the one-party system dismantled, a multi-party coalition forming, and citizens tasting real freedom, had the Hungarian people finally secured their independence? Or, as history so often asks, how long could a spectacular democratic triumph like this survive in the shadow of the Soviet Empire? It's a massive question of power and geopolitics that honestly still resonates today. Thanks for joining me to unpack this incredible moment in history.